A small-town music teacher, Elena, never expected a simple wedding gig to change her life. But when a chance encounter with the enigmatic billionaire Damien leads to a shared dream, she's thrust into a world of passion, purpose, and unexpected love. Will she embrace this new life, or stay hidden in the shadows? Who is the real Elena, and what will she risk for happiness? Tune in to find out. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a chapter of this incredible journey. Elena Brooks adjusted the bench in front of the glossy white piano, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed out the edges of her sheet music. "You can do this," she whispered under her breath, forcing a shaky smile as the wedding coordinator flashed her a frantic thumbs up from across the sun-drenched lawn. Elena wasn't supposed to be here. She was a substitute music teacher at Crestwood Elementary, not a luxury wedding pianist. But when her best friend came down with a brutal flu, she begged Elena to cover for her at the last minute. Just play the processional, the recessional, maybe a cocktail set. Easy enough, right? Except nothing about Silverwood Manor felt easy. Everywhere Elena looked, there were mountains of white roses, towering crystal chandeliers hanging from ancient oaks, and guests so polished and stylish they could have stepped right off the pages of a fashion magazine. Elena exhaled and pressed her fingers against the keys, letting the first delicate notes float into the warm afternoon air. As the bridesmaids began their slow procession down the aisle, some of her tension melted away. Music had always been her safe place, her anchor. She let it wrap around her like a shield, shutting out the intimidating spectacle around her. Damien Carter glanced at his watch for the third time in as many minutes, barely suppressing a sigh. He hated weddings, too much noise, too much pretense. He wasn't even close to the groom, just an early investor who had agreed to show face because his assistant said it would be good optics. He was about to mentally check out entirely when he heard the music. Not the usual canned, lifeless wedding tunes, but something else, something real. His gaze shifted toward the piano, where a woman in a simple navy dress played with a passion that stood in stark contrast to the glossy surroundings. She had her brown curls twisted into a messy bun, no flashy jewelry, no designer labels, nothing to shout for attention. And yet, Damien found himself sitting up straighter, strangely riveted. Then, just as the bride prepared to step onto the aisle, disaster struck. The sound system, a carefully orchestrated array of hidden speakers, gave a loud, garbled screech and died completely. A collective gasp rippled through the guests, and the wedding planner's face turned a terrifying shade of red. For one paralyzing second, the entire ceremony teetered on the edge of chaos. Without thinking, Elena shifted her sheet music aside and launched into a soft lyrical melody, filling the awkward silence with music so graceful and pure that the crowd collectively held its breath. She played entirely from instinct, weaving notes into the sunlight, soothing the frayed nerves of the moment. The bride, looking relieved, continued down the aisle, and the ceremony went on. Damien watched, astonished. Anyone else would have frozen, panicked, but not her. This woman, the one who didn't seem to fit here at all, had just rescued the most important moment of the day, with nothing but her hands and her courage. As the ceremony wrapped up and applause broke over the lawn, Elena struck the final chord and let her hands fall to her lap, heart pounding. Relief and adrenaline warred inside her. She had survived. She started to gather her music, ready to slip away into obscurity, when the wedding planner practically skidded across the grass to her side. "The cocktail musicians are stuck in traffic," she hissed, panic rising. "Can you stay and play a little longer? We'll double your fee." Elena hesitated. She had planned to leave as soon as she finished, slip back to her tiny apartment, change into sweatpants, and pretend today had never happened. But the thought of a little extra money she desperately needed for her broken radiator, nudged her decision. "Sure," she said, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Just tell me where to set up." 10 minutes later, she found herself tucked under a gauzy white canopy, playing a soft jazz arrangement while guests sipped champagne and murmured over oysters. She kept her head down, focused on the music, wishing she could disappear. At the bar, Damien Carter nursed a glass of whiskey, unable to tear his eyes away from her. He wasn't used to noticing women like her. His world revolved around polished models and sharp-tongued influencers, Women who knew exactly how to spin attention into currency. But this pianist, this Elena, played as if the world outside her music didn't exist. And Damien, for the first time in a long while, wanted to step inside that world, even if only for a moment. Elena kept her eyes glued to the keys, letting her fingers drift from one song to the next, each melody blending into the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. She told herself not to look up, not to meet the gazes of the glittering guests who floated past in designer gowns and sharp suits. This wasn't her world. She was just a substitute, a placeholder until the real musicians arrived. And when they did, she would pack up quietly and disappear like a ghost. At the bar, Damien Carter watched her, a strange kind of fascination tugging at his attention. There was something magnetic about the way she seemed utterly unaffected by the spectacle around her. Like she wasn't performing for anyone but herself. He didn't realize how long he'd been staring until a soft laugh broke his focus. "You're obvious, you know," a voice murmured. Damien turned to see his cousin Sloane smirking over her cocktail. "If you like her, stop gawking like a creep." "Shut up," Damien muttered under his breath, brushing her off, but the seed had already been planted. He drained the last of his whiskey, adjusted his jacket, and crossed the lawn toward the piano, his steps slow and deliberate. Elena finished the last notes of a jazz standard and reached for her jacket just as he approached. She glanced up and froze. The man standing in front of her was taller than she'd realized, all clean lines and sharp edges. His steel blue eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "Nice playing," he said casually, his voice low and smooth. Thanks," she replied, her voice more cautious than she intended. "You're not a wedding pianist, are you?" His lips quirked in a half-smile. She blinked, caught off guard. "Is it that obvious?" "You play like you actually care about the music," he said. "Most people here just care about the paycheck." Elena didn't know what to say to that. Compliments from strangers, especially handsome, terrifyingly rich-looking ones, weren't exactly part of her daily life. "I'm Damien," he offered, extending his hand. "Elena," she replied, shaking it. His grip was warm, firm, confident in a way that unnerved her. "Last-minute replacement," she added like a confession. "Well, Elena the replacement," Damien said, his eyes glinting. "Can I buy you a drink?" "Consider it a thank you for saving the ceremony from musical disaster." She hesitated, old instincts urging her to politely decline, to slip away before she could embarrass herself. But something about him, maybe the unexpected kindness in his gaze, or maybe just the way her heart was hammering wildly in her chest, made her say, "Sure." He guided her to a smaller bar tucked beneath a line of strung-up fairy lights. It felt quieter here, almost private. Damien ordered something she didn't recognize, and she asked for sparkling water, still half convinced this wasn't actually happening. "So," he said, leaning one elbow casually on the bar, "what do you really do?" "I teach music at a public elementary school," she said, wrapping her hands around her glass, "mostly recorders and middle school drama." Damien smiled, a genuine, amused smile that softened his whole face. "That explains the patience." "And you?" she asked, tipping her head curiously. He shrugged. "I invest in things. Startups, tech, real estate, whatever keeps me busy." "So, like a venture capitalist?" she asked. "Something like that," he said, and she didn't press. He liked that. Most people would have. They ended up talking for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Elena ever would have guessed. They joked about the absurdity of weddings, swapped favorite books, and admitted to irrational childhood fears. Elena made Damien laugh, a real laugh, not the calculated, polished chuckles he gave at board meetings, and each time she did, she felt the invisible wall between them shrink a little more. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink, Elena glanced at her phone and winced. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I have to be up early tomorrow. Middle schoolers wait for no one." "I'll walk you to your car," Damien said immediately, as if the thought of letting her walk alone was unthinkable. Elena hesitated again, then nodded. As they crossed the now empty lawn, the last few guests lingering near the bar, she couldn't help but wonder if this night was some kind of strange dream she'd wake up from. When they reached her battered little hatchback, Damien stopped and looked at it, then at her. "I'd like to see you again," he said, suddenly serious. She blinked, startled. "Why?" He grinned, and for the first time he looked almost boyish. Because you're real, and I haven't met someone real in a long, long time. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She bit her lip, searching his face for any trace of mockery, and found none. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien pulled a slim card from his wallet and handed it to her. Call this number. It'll go straight to me. She took it with trembling fingers, still not sure if this was real life. As she drove away, Elena dared to glance once in the rearview mirror. Damien was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her taillights disappear into the night. Elena stood outside the school auditorium, clutching a thick stack of sheet music to her chest as a wave of children's laughter echoed down the hallway. A week had passed since the wedding, and she still wasn't sure any of it had been real. For 3 days, she stared at Damien's card, debating whether to call. When she finally worked up the nerve, he answered on the first ring and without hesitation invited her to dinner. But it wasn't a typical coffee date. Instead, a sleek black car had arrived outside her building, the driver greeting her with polite formality, holding the door open as if she were royalty. Now, between classes, broken violin strings, and a principal hinting at a full-time offer for next semester, Elena found her mind drifting back to him during the most inconvenient moments. She shook herself out of it, pushing through the heavy auditorium doors. Her students were waiting, excited and fidgeting, for spring recital rehearsal. Elena threw herself into the work, letting the music tether her feet to the ground. It wasn't until hours later, when the last kid scampered off stage and she finally checked her phone, that she saw the new message. Dinner tonight. I'll send a car at 7. Wear something you like. No signature, but she didn't need one. That evening, Elena stood frozen in front of her tiny closet. Designer gowns were out of the question. She finally settled on a navy dress with a modest cut and the only pair of heels she hadn't donated to Goodwill. When the same black car arrived promptly at 7, she climbed in, heart hammering, feeling like an imposter in a world she didn't understand. But instead of a high-end restaurant or glitzy hotel, the car pulled up to an unassuming brick building tucked between 2 historic structures downtown. Soft amber lights illuminated the entrance, and a valet in a sharp uniform opened her door before she could even reach for the handle. Elena stepped inside and stopped short. The space was a private art gallery, empty except for carefully placed sculptures and sprawling abstract paintings. No guests, no crowds, only curated light casting golden shadows across the floor, and in the center of the room, Damien stood waiting, holding 2 glasses of champagne. You rented out an entire gallery? Elena asked, her voice catching in her throat. He smiled, a little sheepish. I thought it would be easier to talk without strangers listening. Also, you mentioned you liked art. I said I doodled in the margins of lesson plans, she laughed. That counts, he said, offering her a glass. They wandered through the gallery together, pausing at a sculpture made of twisted copper. Elena tilted her head, studying the chaotic shape. It looks like it's trying to escape itself. Damien turned to her, intrigued. That's an interesting way to put it. You've never seen it like that. He shook his head. I usually just notice the technique, materials, composition. Then you're missing the point, she said lightly. He chuckled, not offended, but thoughtful. They moved to a wall where a lone painting hung, a storm of deep blues and restless grays colliding on canvas. Elena stared longer at this one. This feels like regret, she murmured. Damien watched her carefully. What would you paint, if you could? She answered without hesitation. My mother's hands, they were always moving, cooking, sewing, playing the piano, always doing something for someone else. You lost her? His voice was gentle. Cancer, she said, 4 years ago. He didn't offer platitudes, just nodded, the silence between them full but not uncomfortable. My father, he began after a pause, built his empire by never stopping. He thought rest was weakness. I didn't see him sit still until the week he died. Elena turned toward him, studying the faint shadows under his eyes. Is that why you're always surrounded by noise? Damien blinked, caught off guard. What noise? Events, people, deals, distractions. You're hiding in plain sight. For a long beat, he said nothing. Then he exhaled, slow and honest. You're not wrong. They wandered deeper into the gallery, eventually reaching a small table set near a tall window. A private chef appeared, served them 2 elegant courses, and disappeared as quietly as he came. The food was exquisite, but Elena barely noticed it. Between bites, Damien asked, "Why music?" "It's the only thing that ever made sense when everything else fell apart," she said simply. Music stayed. And teaching? I needed to matter to someone. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "You do." Elena looked up slowly, her heart skipping at the weight of those words. "You barely know me. I know enough to see the way you shift the air around you." Her breath caught. She wasn't used to being seen. Damien stood and offered his hand. "Come with me." Without questioning, she followed him to a hidden door at the back of the gallery, stepping into a rooftop garden draped in lavender and fairy lights, the city twinkling beyond. "I come here when I feel like I'm losing perspective," he said quietly. "You don't strike me as someone who loses control." "I do," he whispered. "More often than you think." The wind lifted her hair, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Damien stepped closer, tentative but sure, and when he leaned in, Elena didn't pull away. Their kiss was slow, searching, as if they were both trying to memorize the feeling. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this isn't just a moment." Elena didn't answer right away. She closed her eyes, feeling the hum of the city, the warmth of his hand in hers. "I don't know what it is yet," she whispered, "but it doesn't feel small." The next afternoon, Elena stood in front of a towering glass building, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Damien had called late the night before, asking if she could meet him at his office. He hadn't said much, just that he had something to show her. As she stepped through the polished doors, the receptionist greeted her with a warm, practiced smile and directed her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. The city unfolded beneath her in flashes of sunlit steel and brick, a world she usually navigated by crowded buses and cracked sidewalks. Up here, everything looked cleaner, more distant. When the elevator finally dinged open, she stepped into a vast open office, all glass and dark walnut floors, the skyline stretching out behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Damien stood near the edge, sleeves rolled up, his hands tucked into his pockets, staring out at the view. For a second, Elena hovered at the threshold, unsure if she belonged in a place like this. It felt like walking into someone else's life, a movie she hadn't auditioned for. "You came," he said without turning. "I almost didn't," she admitted, stepping closer. "Why? Because I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "And standing here makes me feel like I'm about to be handed a script I didn't agree to read." He finally turned, his expression unreadable. "I'm not trying to cast you in anything, Elena." "Then what am I doing here?" she asked, folding her arms. Instead of answering, he crossed the room to a sleek black cabinet near the window. Unlocking it with a small silver key, he pulled out a leather-bound folder and handed it to her. "I want to show you something." Elena opened it slowly. Architectural blueprints, renderings, documents. Across the top of the first page, in bold letters, it read, "The Brooks Music and Arts Initiative." She blinked, stunned. "What is this?" "A project I've been thinking about for a while," he said, "but I didn't know what it should be. Not until I met you." She flipped through the plans. A restored performance hall, classrooms for community music lessons, a scholarship fund for students who couldn't afford private instruction. It wasn't just an idea. It was detailed, real. "You're funding this?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Fully," he said, "but I don't want it to be mine. I want it to be ours. I want you to help design it, shape it, make sure it matters." Elena set the folder down gently as if it might break. Her mind spun with disbelief, with hope, with fear. "This isn't some romantic gesture, is it?" she asked quietly. "No," he said immediately, his voice soft but certain. "This isn't about impressing you. This is about doing something meaningful, and I can't do it right without you." She studied him, searching for the arrogance she had braced for, the ego, the strings, but found none. Just sincerity. Maybe even a little fear. "You don't do anything halfway, do you?" she said, half smiling. "I'm not built that way," he admitted. She walked toward the window, staring down at the tiny cars and ant-sized people below. If she said yes, it couldn't be out of gratitude. It had to be because it was something she believed in, something she could build with her own 2 hands. "If I help," she said carefully, "it's because I want to, not because I want to be rescued, and not because I'm some 'Cause you're trying to fix. You're not a cause, he said fiercely, stepping closer. You're a beginning. The room was silent for a long moment. Why me? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you see the world the way I wish I did, he said. And because being near you makes me want to stop chasing noise and start building something real. She turned to him, and this time she didn't step back. She let his words settle over her like a promise. Later that night, long after she'd left his office with the folder clutched tightly against her chest, Elena lay awake, tracing possibilities against the ceiling. She wasn't afraid of falling anymore. For the first time in her life, she was afraid of not jumping. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the future wasn't something happening to her. It was something she was choosing. The polished stone terrace of Silverwood Manor shimmered under the soft glow of string lights, casting warm halos over tables adorned with ivory roses and silver-rimmed glasses. Elena stood near the edge of the terrace, her slate blue dress brushing against her calves as the evening breeze stirred around her. A soft jazz trio played in the background, their music weaving through the gathering crowd of donors, city officials, and artists. Tonight wasn't a party, it was a milestone. The announcement of the Brooks Music and Arts Initiative, a dream that had taken shape from a few sketches and late-night conversations, now backed by grants, community support, and months of relentless work. She scanned the crowd until she found Damien across the terrace, deep in conversation with two board members. He looked different now, less restless, more grounded. His posture, his focus, even the way he listened had shifted. Slowly but surely, Damien Carter was becoming a man who built things to last, not just to win. When he caught her eye, he excused himself with a brief nod and crossed the terrace, the crowd parting instinctively. "You look like you're about to give a speech," he murmured, brushing a hand lightly against her arm. "I'm not," Elena said, though her pulse betrayed her. "I'm just trying not to pass out." "You've wrangled an auditorium full of recorders and hyperactive kids," he said, his voice low and sure. "You can handle a few wealthy donors." "I'd take the kids any day," she teased, but her smile was genuine. He leaned closer, his lips near her ear. "None of this would have happened without you." "I don't need credit," she whispered back. "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." Before she could respond, the host called for the crowd's attention, and the evening's presentations began. Elena tried to stay calm, applauding politely as officials spoke about the importance of the arts, about revitalizing the city's cultural spaces. She barely heard a word until suddenly her name was announced, and the spotlight shifted to her. Frozen for half a second, she felt Damien's steady hand at her back, grounding her. Elena stepped up to the small stage, her heart thrumming wildly in her chest. The microphone loomed, the faces blurred in the low golden light. She didn't have a speech prepared. She hadn't even known she would be speaking at all. So she spoke the truth. "I didn't plan to be standing here tonight," she began, voice trembling only slightly. 2 months ago, I was a substitute pianist at a wedding I wasn't even supposed to attend. I didn't know anyone there. I didn't belong among the chandeliers or the champagne towers. I was just trying not to mess up. A small ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. And yet, somehow that night changed everything. She paused, gathering herself. For a long time, I believed that staying quiet, staying small was the safest way to live. But safe doesn't build dreams. Safe doesn't change the world. She gestured toward the large easels displaying renderings of the future music center. This project isn't about prestige or appearances. It's about access. It's about giving kids a chance to find something steady, something beautiful, before the world teaches them to doubt it. It's about making a space where they know they belong. She caught Damien's gaze, steady and unwavering. And for me, it's about stepping into a space I helped create and believing I deserve to be there. The applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was real, heartfelt. Elena returned to her seat, her cheeks burning, her hands trembling just slightly. Damien reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it gently, a silent conversation passing between them. Later, as the crowd thinned and the terrace settled into a softer murmur, Elena found herself near the fountain, watching the reflections of the string lights ripple across the water. Damien appeared beside her, jacket slung casually over his shoulder. a rare tenderness in his expression. "I've never seen you like that," he said. "Terrified?" she teased. "Brilliant," he corrected, brushing a curl from her cheek. She looked up at him, the question she'd kept buried, rising to the surface. "Are you still sure?" she asked quietly. "About all of this?" "Especially about all of this," he said. Before she could second guess, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught, the world narrowing to just him and the moment between them. "This wasn't the plan for tonight," Damien said, his voice a little unsteady. "But nothing about us has gone according to plan anyway." He opened the box, revealing a simple, stunning ring, elegant, timeless, exactly like her. "I don't need fireworks," he said. "I just need you. Every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful part of you. Elena Brooks, will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision, but her voice was steady when she said, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and as the city lights flickered behind them and the last strains of music floated through the air, Elena leaned into him, knowing without doubt she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sometimes the most unexpected moments lead us exactly where we are meant to be. Elena didn't set out to change her life when she agreed to play piano at a stranger's wedding. She wasn't chasing fame, wealth, or recognition. She simply showed up as herself, quiet, genuine, and passionate about what she loved. And that authenticity opened a door to a life she never dared to imagine. The true heart of this story isn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It's about choosing courage over comfort. It's about believing that even if you start small, even if you feel invisible, you have the power to create something lasting and beautiful. Damien, too, learned that real success isn't measured by headlines or deals, but by the lives we touch and the spaces we build for others. Love, purpose, and fulfillment don't arrive in a blaze of perfection. They arrive in the quiet choices, to stay, to fight for meaning, and to believe that we are worthy of more than just surviving. Their journey reminds us that real love sees beyond appearances, and real dreams begin when we dare to believe we belong. Where are you tuning in from? We'd love to hear your story too. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can continue this journey with us, full of heartwarming stories, powerful lessons, and the magic of second chances. See you in the next one.